Marcus Webb had always prided himself on his linguistic precision. As the head cultural translator at Proxima Station's diplomatic quarter, he'd mastered 17 alien languages and could navigate the subtle nuances of interspecies communication with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. Which made his current predicament all the more embarrassing. The Altarian delegation is requesting clarification on subsection 47 of the Mineral Rights Treaty, announced Iris, the station's AI, her voice echoing through Marcus's cramped office. They seem agitated. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes and glanced at the chronometer. 3 hours into what was supposed to be a routine trade negotiation, and already things were going sideways. He'd been working non-stop for the past week, preparing for this crucial meeting between the Human Colonial Authority and the Altarian Trade Consortium. The Altarians controlled some of the richest dilithium deposits in the Outer Rim, and this treaty could secure humanity's expansion into the Kepler sector. "Send them in," Marcus said, straightening his rumpled shirt and running a hand through his disheveled brown hair. He'd barely had time to shower this morning, let alone make himself presentable for what was arguably the most important negotiation of his career. The door chimed, and Marcus looked up to see Zena Voles enter his office. Even after 3 days of meetings, the sight of her still caught him off guard. Altarians were humanoid but distinctly alien, tall and willowy, with skin that shifted between pale silver and soft blue depending on their emotional state. Zena's skin currently held a steady silver hue, suggesting calm control, though Marcus had learned to watch for the subtle tells that indicated her true feelings. Her most striking features were her eyes, large, luminous, and a shade of violet that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Her hair, if it could be called that, resembled spun moonlight, flowing down to her shoulders in ethereal strands that moved with their own mysterious current. She wore the traditional Altarian diplomatic robes, flowing garments that seemed to be cut from starlight itself. "Translator Webb," she said, her voice carrying the melodic quality common to her species. "We require clarification on the territorial boundaries described in Section 47. The geometric calculations seem imprecise." Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit. And call me Marcus, we've been working together long enough to drop the formalities." Zena's skin flickered briefly to a warmer blue before returning to silver. "Very well. Marcus." She pronounced his name with careful precision, the way she approached everything. "The issue remains with the mathematical projections." As she settled into the chair, Marcus couldn't help but notice how gracefully she moved. Everything about Altarians was elegant, from their flowing gestures to their musical speech patterns. It was part of what made them such effective diplomats. They had a natural ability to put others at ease, even when negotiating complex treaties. Marcus pulled up the relevant documents on his holographic display, the blue light casting strange shadows across both their faces. "Let me see. I think I spot the problem. The measurements are listed in standard colonial units, but the spatial coordinates are using Altarian astronavigation references. Let me convert these for you." As he worked, manipulating the holographic interface with practiced ease, Marcus found himself stealing glances at Zena. There was something mesmerizing about the way she studied the data, her violet eyes tracking every calculation with intense focus. Her skin had shifted to a subtle pattern of silver and blue, indicating what Marcus had learned was deep concentration mixed with curiosity. "You know," Marcus said, pausing in his calculations, "I've been working with interspecies negotiations for 8 years, and I have to say, Altarian mathematical systems are some of the most elegant I've encountered. The way you integrate spatial relationships with temporal flux calculations is genuinely beautiful." Zena's skin flushed a deeper blue, and her luminous hair seemed to brighten slightly. "You find our mathematics beautiful?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied, warming to the subject. "Most species treat mathematics as purely functional, but Altarians have turned it into an art form. The way you structure your equations follows aesthetic principles as much as logical ones. It's remarkable." What Marcus didn't know, couldn't have known without years of deep cultural immersion, was that among Altarians, praising someone's mathematical elegance was one of the most intimate compliments possible. Mathematics, to Altarians, was considered the language of the soul, the purest expression of one's inner nature. To call someone's mathematical work beautiful was tantamount to declaring romantic interest. Xena's skin had now shifted to a complex pattern of deep blues and soft purples, a display that would have been unmistakable to any Altarian observer. Her usually steady voice carried a slight tremor as she responded. That is, such words carry great weight among my people, Marcus. Oblivious to the significance of her reaction, Marcus smiled and returned his attention to the calculations. Well, it's true. Here, let me show you how the conversions work so you can verify them with your own systems. He stood and moved around the desk to stand beside her chair, pulling up a new set of holographic displays. The mathematics floated in the air between them, complex equations rendered in shimmering light. As Marcus began explaining the conversion process, he became aware of Xena's proximity, the subtle, ozone-like scent that seemed to surround all Altarians, the soft luminescence of her hair, the way her skin pattern seemed to pulse gently like a slow heartbeat. The key is understanding that human spatial measurements are linear, Marcus explained, manipulating the holographic numbers with hand gestures, while Altarian measurements account for gravitational distortion and temporal dilation. So we need to apply a correction factor based on local spacetime curvature. Xena leaned closer to study the equations, and Marcus caught a glimpse of her expression, intense, focused, but with something else underneath. Something that looked almost like hope. Your explanation is most illuminating, she said softly. The way you bridge our different mathematical languages shows great sensitivity to cultural nuance. Marcus felt a flush of pride. That's my job, after all. Building bridges between different ways of thinking. He paused, struck by a sudden thought. You know, Xena, I've been wondering, Altarian names usually have specific meanings related to astronomical phenomena, don't they? What does Xena signify? Her skin flushed an even deeper blue, the patterns becoming more complex and rapid. It refers to the binary star system where two celestial bodies orbit so closely they share atmospheric matter. The moment when separate entities become. She paused, searching for the right word in standard, unified. That's beautiful, Marcus said, genuinely moved. Like two stars dancing together. What Marcus had unknowingly done was ask about the most intimate aspect of Xena's identity and then respond with what Altarians would consider a poetic declaration of romantic destiny. In Altarian culture, binary star systems represented perfect romantic partnerships, two beings so perfectly matched they became one while remaining distinct. Xena stood abruptly, her skin now cycling through rapid patterns of blue, purple, and silver. I must return to my delegation. The calculations are satisfactory. We will approve Section 47 as amended. She moved toward the door with swift, flowing steps, but paused at the threshold. Marcus, she said without turning around, among my people, we have a saying, mathematics is the poetry of the universe, but only those who truly understand both can appreciate the beauty. Thank you for understanding. Before Marcus could respond, she was gone, leaving only the faint ozone scent and a lingering luminescence in the air. Marcus stood alone in his office, surrounded by floating holographic equations, with the distinct feeling that something important had just happened, something he didn't entirely understand. Iris, he called out, can you access the cultural database on Altarian social customs? Specifically regarding mathematical complements and name etymology. Searching cultural databases, Iris replied. Estimated time for comprehensive analysis, 47 minutes. Marcus settled back into his chair, a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety building in his chest. He had the growing suspicion that his linguistic precision might have been a little too precise for his own good. As he waited for Iris's analysis, he found himself replaying every moment of his interaction with Xena, trying to decode the meaning behind her skin patterns and her careful words. Outside his office window, the stars of the Proxima system glittered like distant jewels, and somewhere among them, Marcus realized, there might be answers to questions he was only beginning to understand how to ask. Rosa Martinez had never met a problem she couldn't solve with the right tools, enough coffee, and a healthy dose of stubborn determination. As Proxima Station's chief atmospheric engineer, she'd kept the life support systems running through solar flares, asteroid impacts, and 3 separate diplomatic crises. What she hadn't expected was for her biggest challenge to come in the form of a 7-foot-tall crystalline being who hummed Bach while recalibrating oxygen scrubbers. "The harmonic resonance is off by 0.03%, Keth Zorin announced, his voice carrying the distinctive crystalline timbre of his species. The Vesperians were silicon-based life forms, their bodies composed of living crystal that could shift between transparency and opacity at will. Keth's current form was a translucent amber, shot through with veins of deeper gold that pulsed in rhythm with his words." Rosa looked up from her diagnostic tablet, pushing a strand of dark hair from her sweat-dampened forehead. She'd been crawling through maintenance tunnels for the past 4 hours, chasing down a cascade failure in the station's atmospheric processing system. The last thing she needed was her Vesperian colleague pointing out microscopic imperfections in her work. 0.03% is well within acceptable parameters, Rosa replied, perhaps more sharply than necessary. The system is stable. Keth's crystalline form shimmered, his color shifting to a cooler blue-green. Among Vesperians, color changes were as natural as breathing, but Rosa had learned to read them over the past 2 weeks since Keth had arrived as part of a technology exchange program. Blue-green usually meant he was processing information or, occasionally, mild confusion. Acceptable, yes, Keth agreed, his voice taking on the harmonic overtones that indicated he was about to launch into a technical explanation. But optimal? The resonance frequency could be adjusted to create a more harmonious integration with the station's structural vibrations. Rosa set down her tablet and really looked at her colleague for the first time that day. Keth stood nearly 7 feet tall, his crystalline body catching and refracting the harsh industrial lighting of the engineering deck into rainbow patterns that danced across the walls. His face, if it could be called that, was a marvel of geometric precision, angular planes that somehow managed to convey emotion through subtle shifts in luminosity and transparency. "You know what, Keth?" Rosa said, feeling the exhaustion of the long day settling into her bones. "You're probably right. But right now, I'm more concerned with keeping everyone breathing than achieving perfect harmonic resonance." Keth's colors shifted again, this time to a warmer amber with hints of rose quartz. "You have been working for 13 hours and 27 minutes without rest," he observed. "This is not optimal for human physiology." Rosa couldn't help but smile at his precise timing. Vesperians experience time differently than humans, something to do with their crystalline structure's interaction with electromagnetic fields. Keth always knew exactly how long anything had been happening, down to the second. "Welcome to emergency maintenance," Rosa said, wiping her hands on her coveralls. "Sometimes the station doesn't wait for convenient working hours to have a breakdown." The atmospheric processing center hummed around them, a vast chamber filled with towering filtration columns and recycling units that kept Proxima Station's 30,000 inhabitants supplied with breathable air. Rosa had always found the space oddly comforting, all that precisely controlled chaos, systems within systems working in perfect harmony to sustain life in the void of space. "Perhaps," Keth said, his voice taking on a different quality, softer, more musical, "you would benefit from sustenance. I have observed that human efficiency decreases significantly after 12 hours without food intake." Rosa realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. "You're not wrong, but the cafeteria's probably closed by now, and I've got at least 3 more hours of diagnostics to run." Keth's form brightened noticeably, his amber color warming to honey gold. "I have brought sustenance," he announced, gesturing to a crystalline container Rosa hadn't noticed before. "My species does not require traditional food, but I have researched human nutritional needs." Rosa stared at the container, surprised by the thoughtful gesture. "You brought me food? Protein synthesis bars, hydration supplements, and..." Keth paused, his colors shifting through several hues as if he were accessing internal data, "What your species calls comfort food. I was uncertain of your preferences, so I acquired a variety." Rosa opened the container to find an assortment of snacks, energy bars, and what looked like homemade cookies. Keth, where did you get homemade cookies? I observed the preparation process in the civilian quarters and attempted to replicate it using the molecular synthesis units, Keth explained, his form taking on subtle patterns that Rosa was beginning to recognize as his version of pride. The recipe required 17 attempts to achieve proper chemical composition. Rosa picked up one of the cookies and took a bite. It was surprisingly good, warm, with just the right balance of sweetness and texture. You made these yourself? The process was illuminating, Keth replied. Human food preparation involves considerable artistry alongside scientific precision. It is not unlike the harmonic compositions my people create from crystalline resonance. Rosa found herself genuinely touched by the gesture. In the 2 weeks they'd worked together, Keth had been professional, brilliant, and utterly alien. This was the first time he'd done something that felt personal. Thank you, she said, settling onto a nearby equipment crate and gesturing for Keth to join her. This is really thoughtful. Want to share them with me? What Rosa didn't know, couldn't have known without deep study of Vesperian cultural customs, was that among crystalline beings, the act of sharing food was profoundly significant. Vesperians didn't eat in the traditional sense, they absorbed energy directly from various sources. But the act of preparing food for another being and then sharing the experience of consumption was considered one of the most intimate bonding rituals in their culture, essentially equivalent to a marriage proposal. Keth's entire crystalline form suddenly blazed with brilliant light, cycling rapidly through every color of the spectrum before settling into a warm, rose-gold hue that Rosa had never seen him display before. You wish to share sustenance with me? He asked, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to sing. Of course, Rosa replied, breaking a cookie in half and offering him a piece. You went to all this trouble to make them. Besides, everything's better when shared, right? Keth accepted the cookie fragment with hands that had suddenly become almost completely transparent, revealing the complex internal structures of light and energy that comprised his being. Among my people, he said, his voice now carrying so many harmonic overtones that it sounded like a choir, the sharing of prepared sustenance is significant. Rosa noticed his agitation but misinterpreted it as excitement about human customs. It's a pretty universal concept, isn't it? Breaking bread together, sharing a meal, most cultures have some version of it as a bonding experience. Bonding, Keth repeated, the word resonating through his crystalline structure like a bell. Yes. Bonding. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, Rosa savoring the unexpected break and Keth somehow managing to consume the cookie despite lacking any visible digestive system. The atmospheric processors hummed around them, their rhythmic cycling creating a soothing backdrop to the meal. You know, Rosa said, I've been curious about something. Your name, Keth Zoran, what does it mean in your language? Keth's colors deepened, taking on rich burgundy and deep purple hues. Keth refers to the harmonic frequency that occurs when two crystals achieve perfect resonance, when their vibrations synchronize so completely that they function as a single entity while maintaining their individual structures. Zoran means song of joining. Rosa smiled, struck by the poetry of it. That's beautiful. Like a duet where both voices complement each other perfectly. The words hit Keth like a harmonic shock wave. His entire form blazed with light so brilliant that Rosa had to shield her eyes. In Vesperian culture, describing someone's name as beautiful and comparing it to perfect harmony was the traditional response to a bonding proposal, essentially accepting the offer of marriage. Rosa Martinez, Keth said, his voice now a symphony of crystalline tones, I believe there has been a significant cultural misunderstanding. What do you mean? Rosa asked, still blinking spots from her vision. Keth's form settled into a steady, warm gold shot through with threads of deep blue, colors Rosa had never seen him display. When you accepted my offer to share the prepared sustenance, and when you spoke of harmony and bonding, among my people, these actions constitute acceptance of a ceremonial joining. Rosa felt her stomach drop. Ceremonial joining. Like marriage? The closest human equivalent, yes, Keth confirmed. The preparation of food, the sharing of consumption, the acknowledgement of harmonic resonance in naming traditions, these are the traditional steps of Vesperian bonding ritual. Rosa stared at him, cookie still in hand, as the implications sank in. So when I said I wanted to share the cookies, you were accepting my proposal of bonding partnership, Keth finished. And when you described my name as Beautiful Harmony, you were confirming your acceptance according to our customs. They sat in stunned silence, the atmospheric processors continuing their eternal cycle around them. Rosa's mind raced through the past few minutes, recontextualizing every word and gesture through this new lens of understanding. Keth, she said finally, I had no idea. I was just being friendly. Grateful for the food. Keth's colors shifted to softer hues, the brilliant golds fading to gentle amber. I understand. The fault is mine for not explaining the cultural significance. I assumed, perhaps I hoped. He trailed off, his harmonic voice becoming almost whisper quiet. Rosa looked at her crystalline colleague, really looked at him. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd come to respect his brilliance, his dedication to their work, and his surprisingly gentle nature. He approached every problem with patience and precision, and he'd shown more consideration for her well-being than most of her human colleagues ever had. You hoped what? She asked softly. Keth's form became more transparent, as if he were trying to fade away entirely. Among my people, working in harmony with another being is rare. Most Vesperians prefer solitary pursuits. But with you, the resonance feels correct. Your approach to engineering, your problem-solving patterns, they complement mine in ways I had not anticipated. Rosa felt something warm unfurling in her chest. You mean we work well together? More than that, Keth replied, his colors warming slightly. When you solve a problem, I can sense the harmonics of your thought patterns. They create beautiful resonance patterns with my own cognitive frequencies. It is deeply satisfying. Rosa couldn't help but smile. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, and I'm not even sure I fully understand it. Keth's form brightened hopefully. You are not distressed by the cultural misunderstanding? Rosa considered the question seriously. Was she distressed? Surprised, certainly. Confused, absolutely. But distressed? She thought about the past 2 weeks, how Keth had quietly adjusted his working schedule to match hers, how he'd learned to modulate his harmonic voice to frequencies that were soothing rather than startling to human ears, how he'd just spent 17 attempts learning to bake cookies simply because he'd noticed she was tired and hungry. I think, Rosa said carefully, that I'd like to understand more about Vesperian bonding customs. Not because I'm accepting anything, she added quickly, but because, well, I'd like to understand you better. Keth's entire crystalline structure seemed to sing with harmonious light. Understanding would be most welcome. Felix Nakamura had always believed that plants were more honest than people. They didn't lie, didn't manipulate, and didn't play games with your emotions. They grew toward the light, took what they needed from the soil, and existed in perfect harmony with their environment. Which was exactly why he'd volunteered for the most isolated assignment on Proxima Station, the Xenobotanical Research Dome, where he could spend his days among alien flora without the complications of human interaction. The biodome was a marvel of engineering, a vast transparent sphere that housed carefully controlled ecosystems from dozens of worlds. Each section maintained its own atmospheric composition, temperature, and lighting to support plant life from across the galaxy. Felix had been tending these gardens for 3 years, and he knew every species, every growth pattern, every subtle sign of health or disease. What he hadn't expected was to find himself completely captivated by the dome's newest addition, both the plants and their caretaker. The luminous heart blooms are responding well to the spectral adjustments, announced a melodic voice from behind a towering stand of crystalline ferns. Their bioluminescent output has increased by 37% since yesterday. Felix looked up from his soil composition analysis to see Nissa Thornweave emerge from the Verdanian section of the dome. She was unlike any being he'd ever encountered, humanoid in basic structure but clearly evolved from plant life rather than animal. Her skin had the smooth, green-tinted quality of a healthy leaf, with delicate patterns of darker veining visible beneath the surface. Her hair resembled flowing vines dotted with tiny, constantly shifting flowers that seemed to bloom and fade in response to her emotions. Most striking were the bioluminescent blooms that grew directly from her shoulders and arms, living jewelry that pulsed with soft, multicolored light. The flowers were never the same twice, shifting through the spectrum as her mood changed, creating an ever-changing display of natural artistry. "That's wonderful news," Felix replied, setting down his instruments and wiping his earth-stained hands on his lab coat. "I was worried the atmospheric composition might be too different from their native environment." Nissa moved with a fluid grace that reminded Felix of wind through wheat fields. Everything about her seemed connected to the rhythm of growing things, her breathing synchronized with the subtle pulse of photosynthesis around them, her movements as natural and unhurried as the turning of leaves towards sunlight. "The adjustment was intuitive," Nissa said, her shoulder blooms shifting to a warm golden hue. "Your people's technology is impressive, but sometimes the plants respond better to understanding than to engineering." Felix had been working with Nissa for only a week since she'd arrived as part of a Verdanian agricultural exchange program, but he'd already learned that her relationship with plant life went far beyond scientific knowledge. She seemed to communicate with the flora on some level he couldn't quite comprehend, not telepathy, exactly, but something deeper and more fundamental. "I've been meaning to ask," Felix said, moving closer to examine the heart blooms, "how do you sense what they need?" "I've been studying xenobotany for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like your intuitive connection with alien species." Nissa's hair flowers shifted through several colors, soft blues and purples that Felix was beginning to associate with contemplation. "My people evolved in symbiosis with our world's plant life. We are not separate from the garden, we are part of it. The boundary between self and flora is fluid." Felix found himself studying her profile as she spoke, fascinated by the way her bioluminescent features seemed to pulse in harmony with the plants around them. Her face was elegantly angular, with large eyes that held flecks of chlorophyll green and warm amber. When she concentrated, tiny buds would appear along her temples, unfurling into miniature flowers that glowed with soft light. "That's remarkable," Felix said. "On Earth, we have some symbiotic relationships between humans and plants, but nothing approaching that level of integration." "Your species approaches botany as observers," Nissa replied, gently touching one of the heart blooms with a finger that had small thorns instead of fingernails. "Verdanians experience it as participants. We do not study the garden, we join the conversation." Felix watched in amazement as the heart bloom responded to her touch, its bioluminescence brightening and synchronizing with the glow of her shoulder flowers. It was like watching a conversation conducted entirely in light and living color. Could you teach me?" Felix asked impulsively. "I mean, I know I don't have your natural abilities, but maybe I could learn to understand plants the way you do." Nissa turned to face him fully, and Felix caught his breath. Her hair flowers had burst into full bloom, dozens of tiny blossoms in shades of rose, gold, and deep crimson. Her shoulder blooms had taken on the same warm colors, creating a display so beautiful it made his chest ache. "You wish to join the garden's conversation?" she asked, her voice carrying harmonics that reminded Felix of wind chimes in a summer breeze. "More than anything," Felix replied honestly. "I've spent my whole career studying plants from the outside, but what you do, it's like you're speaking their language." What Felix didn't know, couldn't have known without deep understanding of Verdanian culture, was that offering to teach someone the garden's conversation was one of the most intimate acts in Verdanian society. To share that level of communion with plant life required complete trust, emotional openness, and what Verdanians considered spiritual bonding. It was typically reserved for life partners or those seeking to create new family units. Nissa's entire body had begun to glow softly, her skin taking on the phosphorescent quality of moonlight through leaves. Her hair flowers were now blooming in rapid succession, creating a cascade of colors that shifted like aurora through a forest canopy. "To join the conversation," Nissa said carefully, "requires deep connection. Not just with the plants, but between those who tend them together. Are you prepared for such intimacy? Felix, interpreting her words through his scientific background, nodded eagerly. I'm willing to learn whatever it takes. I've always felt like there was something missing in my understanding of plant life, some deeper connection I couldn't quite reach. Nissa moved closer, and Felix caught the scent that surrounded her, rich earth after rain, blooming jasmine, and something uniquely alive that made every breath feel like inhaling pure spring air. Very well, she said. We will begin with the singing vines from my homeworld. They are responsive to emotional resonance. She led him to a section of the dome Felix had never entered, where massive vines hung from specially designed supports. The plants were beautiful, deep purple stems with leaves that shifted from silver to gold, and flowers that seemed to hum with actual musical tones. Place your hands here, Nissa instructed, guiding Felix's palms to rest against the vine's main trunk alongside her own. Close your eyes and listen, not with your ears, but with your heart. Felix did as instructed, acutely aware of Nissa's proximity. Her hands were warm against the vine, and he could feel tiny root-like extensions growing from her fingertips to interface directly with the plant's cellular structure. The vine's humming grew more complex, harmonizing with sounds he was only now realizing were coming from Nissa herself, a subsonic song that seemed to resonate through the entire dome. I can feel something, Felix whispered, amazed. The vine was warm under his hands, and he could sense a slow, patient intelligence within it, not human consciousness, but awareness nonetheless. It's like it's aware of us. Yes, Nissa breathed, her voice now entirely composed of harmonious tones. Now, tell it something true. Share a feeling, a memory, a piece of yourself. Felix thought of his childhood on Earth, working in his grandmother's garden. He remembered the smell of tomato plants in summer heat, the satisfaction of harvesting vegetables he'd helped grow, the peace he'd found among growing things when the human world became too complicated. The vine's humming intensified, and Felix gasped as he felt something incredible, the plant's response to his memory. It was sharing its own experiences of growth, of reaching toward light, of the deep satisfaction of roots finding rich soil. For one perfect moment, Felix felt what it was like to be a growing thing, patient and eternal and connected to something vast and green and alive. Magnificent, he breathed, opening his eyes to find Nissa watching him with an expression of wonder. Her entire body was now glowing with soft bioluminescence, her flowers blooming in patterns of gold and deep rose that took his breath away. Felix Nakamura, she said, her voice like wind through wheat, you have a gardener's heart. Your emotional resonance with the plants is extraordinary for a non-Verdanian. Felix felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the tropical atmosphere of the dome. I've never experienced anything like that. It was beautiful, Nissa. You're beautiful. The words hung in the air between them, and Felix realized he'd spoken more truth than he'd intended. But looking at Nissa, at the way her bioluminescent flowers pulsed in response to his words, at the gentle smile that curved her leaf-green lips, at the ancient wisdom in her amber-flecked eyes, he couldn't bring himself to take them back. Nissa's hair flowers burst into the most spectacular bloom Felix had ever seen, a cascade of colors that seemed to contain every sunset, every spring morning, every perfect moment he'd ever experienced in a garden. Among my people, she said softly, beauty is not appearance, it is the harmony between souls and the songs they create in the garden together. Then we make beautiful music, Felix replied, understanding flowing through him like sap rising in spring. Yes, Nissa whispered, and her hand found his among the singing vines. We do. Around them, the entire dome seemed to respond to their connection. Plants throughout the space began to glow more brightly, their growth patterns shifting subtly toward the two figures standing hand in hand among the vines. The air filled with the sound of 1,000 plants humming in harmony, a song of growth, of connection, of two different species finding common ground in the eternal conversation of growing things. Felix had always believed that plants were more honest than people. As he stood there with Nissa, surrounded by the singing garden they would tend together, he realized that sometimes honesty led to the most beautiful truths of all. The biodome continued its eternal cycle of growth and renewal, but now it held something new, a partnership between human curiosity and Verdanian wisdom, a love story written in bioluminescent blooms and whispered in the ancient language of growing things. In the garden's conversation, Felix and Nyssa had found not just understanding, but each other.